All right. So thank you very much for attending the fourth and final part of the Tribal Innovation Series, Protect Your Applications, Data, and Services from Downtime. Thanks for everybody who's attended all 4 of the sessions. Caitlin from our marketing team will be reaching out for the people who have attended multiple ones for the prizes that we've been talking about. Today, what we're going to be talking about is really disaster recovery and disaster recovery as a service more specifically. And joining us today is Bert. And Bert, how is it that you pronounce your last name? Is it
Duran.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I definitely butchered that. So Bert is one of our Xi Cloud specialists, and he'll be doing the lion's share of the presenting of today's topic of disaster recovery as a service with a product called Leap. All of these sessions have been kind of tailored to, tribal issues. And, in my dealings with Native American tribes for the last few years, one of the areas I feel that is lacking in a lot of places, and one that they may admit or may not admit to themselves, is some type of disaster recovery, solution or plan. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that nobody really likes disaster recovery. A lot of organizations view it as kind of an excessive cost, and they view it that way until a disaster hits, and then they don't have any way to kind of fail back to what they had been doing. So that's, creates massive amounts of downtime and a lot of drama. So
if I may add, Justin, loss of revenue.
And loss of revenue, especially to our casino customers or tribes that have casinos or healthcare entities or whatever it may be, that loss of revenue becomes a very real, issue. So today what we're going to talk about is how Nutanix kind of goes about disaster recovery, and specifically disaster recovery as a service, because that's one of the things too that a lot of organizations challenge with is kind of creating and implementing and managing a plan around disaster recovery. So with Nutanix and Leap, we try to take a lot of that complexity out of your hands as it relates to that. If you're a current Nutanix customer or you're looking at Nutanix, what you'll find is it's very easy to manage this disaster recovery as a service plan and be covered. And this ties in really well with the last session that we had, which was around the zero trust. So if, everything else fails and, ransomware does kind of become an issue within your organization, having a good disaster recovery plan is really paramount to making sure that your business can continue and move forward after that situation. So Bert, could you just advance it one slide for me?
Absolutely.
So every time I send a slide to somebody, it's all janky. But again, my name is Justin Razor. I'm Senior Account Executive. I cover Native American tribes. Really, that's everything tribal in nature for Nutanix. So casinos, healthcare, some of the federal entities that deal with tribes. Bert, as I've mentioned, is our Xi Cloud specialist. Eric Katelfu, who's our senior sales engineer. Joanna Kershaw, our inside account executive. And Madeline, who most of you have heard from as she's been reaching out to you for this series. We can be reached at tribes@nutanix.com. So if you send an email to that'll hit all of us, well, except for Bert. And if you have any questions after this session, we can answer those. Also, at the end of this session, I'll be having Tracy from Tribal Hub joining us as well. She'll be giving us a quick rundown of the events that are upcoming for that organization that we're very on the line with. So with that, Bert, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you and let you, do your thing. I will be doing some polls in this one just to kind of get a feel for where people are at with disaster recovery, cloud, and disaster recovery in the cloud. So just to kind of get some feedback. So Bert, go ahead.
Fantastic, Justin. Appreciate it. Does it make sense to turn on my video, or does it matter?
I mean, you're a handsome-looking gentleman. If you want to flaunt
that, I am not. But I actually like folks to see, when I'm talking, because sometimes I get a little passionate, and I speak a lot with my hands. So it might be better for you to understand me as I go along. Nevertheless, thank you very much. Really appreciate the audience, and definitely what I intend to do is actually cover Xyleap Disaster Recovery as a Service, which is a product, a service in Nutanix's Xi Cloud. It's a nascent service in the sense that it's only been live for 2 years. Nevertheless, it's been quite the journey, right? And I say that because over the past 2 years, when we went live in November of 2018 with Xyleap, it's now January 21 and February 21, and we have over 260 now subscribed customers in Nutanix Xi Cloud using the Xyleap service, right? And I think the catalyst for that is the fact that we've now taken this approach of, we always tout AOS as your Nutanix as a private cloud, right? Nutanix AOS as your private cloud in your data center. But we're getting away from that in the sense that with AOS now, you can have just a cloud. And that cloud encompasses not only your on-prem data center, but any hyperscaler cloud, whether it's Xi Cloud or AWS or Azure. We're getting to the point where now you're gonna just have one cloud and you can dynamically just move resources from on-prem to Xi to your secondary data center to AWS dynamically, or not so dynamically. But again, the concept of private versus public is, we're going to blur that line in the next year or so, right? That's our initiative, and that's our commitment to cloud. When I talk about disaster recovery and business continuity, I look at it from the standpoint of where I started my technology career. And I'm originally from New York, and I started my career in New York City financials. And literally, New York City financials, there is no concept of downtime. So your bank cannot be offline ever, right? As such, literally every piece of equipment we bought in the data center had an equivalent mirror in a secondary data center. And as such, it was quite complex to correlate fiefdoms of technology, right? So you had a database team, you had a networking team, you had the Linux team, you had the Windows team, and literally bring all these fiefdoms together to create a single run book for disaster recovery. Failure planning, not only planning, but execution, was a monumental event. It took weeks, sometimes months of planning to make that happen. And likewise, month of planning to come back to the primary data center, right? So all that complexity is now eliminated with Xyleap. Literally, everything that you saw on that page relative to runbook automation, networking, provisioning, et cetera, we've now created this automated, orchestrated tool service that you can use a one-click. We use a one-click mantra to actually enable Xyleap, or enable business continuity in a secondary data center that could be thousands of miles away from your operating environment, right? Fantastic. Let's move this out of the way here. I'm not sure why that popped up there. Excellent. So literally from zero to nothing, to having full disaster recovery, from having nothing to having full disaster recovery, 14 steps with Xyleap, literally 14 steps. We walked through this in our labs, and we found that we can actually protect an entire Nutanix cluster, every VM on that cluster, in 14 steps. Our next best competitive offering, Azure Site Recovery, 131 steps, right? So again, it speaks to the ease, the design, and the automation that we built into this product set, right? And I'll get to more of that in the next couple of slides. So really, our goal was pretty much, our objectives behind Xyleap was pretty much, it was threefold. The way Xyleap works, pretty straightforward, is that we've taken the Nutanix control plane that is Prism Central, right? The management interface, the control plane of AOS on-prem, and paired it to a AOS control plane in the cloud, right? In Xi Cloud. So now we're looking at the same control plane to manage both sites. That eliminates a lot of complexity, and that speaks to what I was talking about before, right? But again, no new platforms to learn, no new technologies to learn, no new service to learn. It's the same Prism Central that you're using to manage your infrastructure on-prem, to manage your infrastructure in the cloud. Once we pair those two control planes, we then create a layer 3 network between those two sites, your on-prem data center and Xi Cloud. And now that we have that layer 3 network, now we can send the data or the snapshots that we're taking from on-prem to Xi, and now we have a footprint to recover those snapshots in Xi, right? But again, our objective was threefold: eliminate cost. From a cost reduction perspective, even if you were to do a secondary data center with the same Nutanix platform that you have on-prem in your secondary data center, Xi is at least, at a minimum, 50% less in terms of TCO, total cost of ownership. From a complexity perspective, I already mentioned, we're using the same control plane, same management interface, right? So eliminates all that learning curve that you have with going with third-party services, correct? And then thirdly, enable consistency. From a consistency perspective, because it is the same control plane, guess what? The policies that we're using to protect the VMs on-prem, the policies that we're using to recover the VMs in Xi are the same policies that we're going to flip to go back the other way when you have to fail back, when you need to fail back to your on-prem data center, right? So there's nothing new to create once you're in Xi, running in Xi. You already created a one policy that takes you from on-prem to Xi. It's the same policy that we're going to use. We're going to flip the primary and the target locations, and now you're going back the other way, right? Not only that, but we know when you fail over from one site to the other, whether that's on-prem or to Xi or Xi to on-prem, we know what's the active site. So as long as we know what the active site is, we can now send the replication the other way, right? And we do that automatically. And I'll show you all that in a couple of slides. Any questions so far? Excellent.
Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to just put them in the Q&A, and we can ask those. And in this web panel, or I'm sorry, in this webinar format, people in the attendee section are muted. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to just ask them in text.
Fantastic. Some key service features that are part of Xi Leap. One is the planning and onboarding service that we provide with a subscription. So when you subscribe to Xi Leap, we don't just send you off on your own and say, go figure it out, Mr. Customer. No, we actually walk you through both not only creating the network connectivity between on-prem and Xi, but also teach you how to fish, in the sense that we help you, we show you how to create those policies to protect the VMs and recover your VMs. We also teach you how to do a failover and a failback between Xi and on-prem. And we also, give you those tool sets, that knowledge transfer to enable the rest of your environment. So now you're well equipped to go out and then finish off that infrastructure protection from on-prem to Xi Leap. In addition to that, we can deploy Xi Leap in a matter of minutes, in the sense that if you're using any one of these physical, VPN appliances or routers, Palo Alto, Cisco, Checkpoint, etc. We actually have automated scripts already defined that will make that connectivity happen in less than 30 minutes, right? We support ESXi and AHV on the source. And again, we provide a virtual VPN appliance if you don't have any one of these 6, or if your third-party appliance doesn't support IKEv2, BGP, and tunneling, right? So those are the prerequisites of the key requirements for your on-prem VPN appliance. Now, continuous testing. Continuous testing, I'll go more into details in a couple of slides, but this really speaks to the fact that we can create a complete isolated sandbox for you to do day-to-day testing, any time of the day testing. So if I wanted to actually test a patch upgrade, or test a new application, or test actually a live blast zone where you can actually test malware and or ransomware, so you can do preventative disaster recovery testing. We give you an environment to actually do that as part of the Zyleap subscription, right? We have financially backed SLAs, service level agreements, for RPO and RPO. RPO speaks to recovery point objective, right? How much data can I lose? Recovery point objective. And we have SLAs around RTO, recovery time objective. How fast can I recover my infrastructure and get my business back online, right? To then again service customers and or save lives, right? In that sense. So we have financially backed XLAs around both of those, right? We can literally recover your entire environment, recovery time objective, in less than 1 hour. We can get your business back and running in less than 1 hour. Now, I don't know if any of you today have a disaster recovery plan and have used it or actually instantiated that, and the pain and angst that comes with that, and then to actually be able to recover, what does that time might look like, right? What does that loss of revenue look like for your organization, right? Imagine having the capability to actually recover your business in less than 1 hour should a disaster occur. What is your revenue per hour look like for your organization? Near sync minute-based RPOs, again, we have recovery point objective now down to minute-based levels. And that means that now I can, send my data across to Xi in 1 minute increments, 5 minute increments, 50-minute increments, right? Meaning, hey, my worst data loss scenario is 5 minutes, right? That's huge and a huge differentiator for us in the market as well. Failover and failback. This speaks to our, again, consistency, right? In terms of how we use the same policies, right? To go from on-prem to Xi, the same policies from Xi to on-prem. It's a one-click failover, one-click failback, right? Not only that, but we have the capability built into the service to actually preserve all your IP addresses when you fail over to Xi. So what does that mean? That means that your on-prem environment, when it's recovered in Xi, looks exactly the same as on-prem. That limits that RTO, right? Now you don't have to go re-IPing, changing network information, configuration, and re-IP your entire infrastructure. It comes up exactly the same, giving you that RTO SLA that we can absolutely stand by, right? So we actually provide that SLA for that RTO. Any questions so far? Excellent. Again, because we are a cloud provider, right? Akin to AWS, Azure, GCP, Alibaba, we have some specific requirements around cloud security, right? So as a cloud provider, we have all the attestations and security compliance requirements for, ISO certifications, SOC 2 certifications, right? And FIPS certifications. We don't support FedRAMP today, but that's something that we're looking to do in the future, right? Again, that connectivity between on-prem and Xi is a layer 3, which is end-to-end encryption with an IPsec tunnel. We do DDoS protection and regular and continuous penetration testing, right? In Xi itself, the security of the VMs, when you recover them in Xi, there is security of your application is your responsibility. So as such, you want to protect it against, malware, again, viruses, etc. But again, we provide you that virtual network isolation or isolation between tenants or between other customers. And again, you can bring your own firewall into Xi, and I'll talk more about that in a minute in a couple of slides. But again, we have multi-factor authentication, and we have also AD integration for role-based access control into Xi, right? So that's all part of the service as well. Again, I mentioned that Xi Cloud is a Nutanix owned and operated public cloud, akin to AWS, GCP, etc., right? As such, we actually went live with Xi Cloud in November of 2018 with US West, US East, and UK London, I guess, United Kingdom. But these three opened up November of 2018. A year later, in December of 2019, we opened up Germany, Italy, and Japan. So we now have 6 regions across the globe, each region with 2 availability zones for high availability between regions, between AZs. right, in the region. And now we're looking to actually open up new regions in central US, Latin America, and Canada. And also later on, we're looking about 24 months out, Southeast Asia in Singapore and Australia as well. Now, in addition to that, to using your current ISP VPN connectivity to connect to Xi, you can also use something like Megaport. Megaport provides a service called Direct Connect, which is dedicated bandwidth, right, between your data center and any hyperscaler, whether it's AWS, Xi Cloud, Azure, GCP, Oracle, whatever the case may be. But this is for users or customers that have pretty large data data capacities or data infrastructures, right? Anything above 150 terabytes worth of data, we actually recommend that they consider using the Megaport Direct Connect service, because that actually gives them dedicated bandwidth and predictable, right, replication between their on-prem and Xi, right? Whereas your current VPN ISP provider, that connectivity may be, very unpredictable, right? Comes in ebbs and flows. Fantastic. Last slide I'll go through before we actually go into a demo of the product is I'll talk about the architecture of Xi, right? And I want to do that. This may seem like an eyesore, but trust me, I'll break this down in very, very contextual manner and easy to follow manner. What I'll do first is talk about the verbiage on the screen. And what you're seeing in relative to the verbiage is here on the top left, we have every bullet point that's included, or every service or every task that's included in the white glove onboarding service that I spoke about that comes as part of the subscription. Again, creating that network connectivity between on-prem and Xi, right? Pairing the control plane from on-prem to Xi. Also creating, teaching you how to create the protection policies and the recovery plans, the policies to protect your VMs and the policies to recover your VMs in Xi, and actually walk you through a failover scenario from on-prem to Xi and back from Xi to on-prem. So that's all part of the white glove onboarding service that comes with Xi. Again, we teach you how to fish, and once we do that with a handful of VMs in your environment, then you go off and create all the rest of your environment, right, to protect the rest of your environment. In the center section here, I have some verbiage relative to prerequisites for using Xi, right, using the service. And one of the key prerequisites or critical prerequisites is the fact that the Nutanix control plane, right, the systems that make up the Nutanix control plane, the CVM host, the AOS host, the Prism element, the Prism Central, that management construct for the AOS, the Nutanix infrastructure, that has to be on an isolated subnet or network from your user or application VMs, right? So we want to segregate that control plane, and to enable that control plane to actually take action on any VMs without impacting the control plane itself. So we isolate that control plane on a separate network, and then we can take action on all your user VMs on their own network, VLANs or port groups. Last, in the bottom right-hand corner here, I talk about some post-onboarding customer considerations. Some of those considerations are this. By the way, consider Xi as your secondary data center, real secondary data center. We can do everything you can do in your secondary data center, albeit this infrastructure has to be totally virtual, right? You don't have any access into our data centers. We can't put your physical appliances in Xi. No, it's a cloud construct. As such, we have very, very rigid security controls, right, to attest for those ISO and SOC type controls, where we can't allow any physical devices or any physical access into the data center. So everything has to be virtual. However, that being said, you can run live virtual workloads in Xi and route those workloads back to on-prem. And I'll speak to more of that in a second. But these post-onboarding customer considerations are things that you can do, like running a live AD-DNS secondary in Xi. So I have my primary on-prem, I can run a secondary in Xi and have that secondary always in sync through my layer 3 network back to my AD primary, right? I can have an SQL server replica in Xi. right? I can have that server, that SQL Server replica running 24/7 in Xi. Again, always in sync with my SQL Server primary on-prem, right? I can run a virtual equivalent of my on-prem firewall in Xi, right? So now I can copy my same security posture that I have on-prem, have that sitting there in Xi, ready for a failover to Xi, so that when I fail over in Xi, if I ever have to, my same security controls are in place, and my users, my failover time, my recovery time objective is further reduced, right? Because now I don't have to work or play with, creating ingress, egress, access controls in and out of the internet at the time of failover. That's already defined in my virtual firewall that's running in Xi 24/7. So those are some post-onboarding customer consideration things that you can do as Xi being your secondary data center, okay? So the verbiage out of the way, let's talk about the infrastructure in and of itself. So Xi Leap in and of itself is, it is a cloud service. However, it's not yet multi-tenant. And what I mean by that is the fact that when you subscribe to Xi, and there are two ways to subscribe to Xi, and I'll mention those in a minute. But when you subscribe to Xi, we actually provision a cluster in Xi of equal or better performance to your cluster on-prem. And I say of equal or better performance because you could be running a G5 NX cluster on-prem or some older version of a Dell hardware or HP hardware, whatever the case may be. But we're always going to give you the latest and greatest NX equivalent in Xi, right? And that could be better chips, better faster memory chips, et cetera, et cetera. So again, we provision a cluster of equal or better performance to that of what you're running on-prem. Now, there are two ways to subscribe to Xi. You can either subscribe to Xi by protecting the entire cluster, or you can subscribe to Xi by protecting just a subset of your VMs in your cluster. So if I'm running 100 VMs, but I only want to protect my most 20 critical VMs, I can subscribe that way as well. Or I can protect the entire cluster and protect my entire 100 VM landscape, right? In either case, the performance of that cluster in the cluster-based scenario, total cores, total CPU, total memory, we actually provision the equivalent of that in Xi. Or those 20 critical VMs, that total vCPU count, that total memory count, we provision a cluster of equal performance or better for that total vCPU count, memory count. As such, we provision that cluster in Xi. That cluster, we then use SDN technology, software-defined networking, to now split that cluster into two virtual clusters. So instead of just giving you one single cluster in Xi, we now give you two virtual clusters from that one physical cluster, and we create what's called a production VPC and a test VPC. And this alludes to my previous slide when I talked about continuous testing. This is the test VPC, and I'm going to get back to that in a minute, but let's just talk about the rest of the architecture. So now, you have Xi Cloud, you have your production VPC, you have your test VPC, you have your control planes connected and talking to one another, now paired up. I can see Xi, I can see on-prem, and now I have my layer 3 connection between my on-prem data center and Xi, and I can send data across. Now note that the production VPC is the only VPC that we have connected back to on-prem through that layer 3 network, that VPN IPsec tunnel. Now that I have these two connectivity functions up and working, my Prism Central control plane connected and my layer 3 network now in place, I can now create the policies to protect your VMs and the policies to recover your VMs in Xi. So we create what's called protection policies first. Protection policies define 4 things. What VMs am I protecting? What's my RPO, my recovery point objective, or my snapshot cadence, right? 3, What's my retention policy for those snapshots? So when I send snapshots across to Xi, right? How long do I want to keep those snapshots in Xi? Fourthly and lastly is what AZ, what availability zone am I going to be protecting to? And I can have multiple availability zones, but I can only send a VM to a specific availability zone. I can't send a VM to 2 availability zones. So 1 VM per availability zones, but I can have multiple VMs. Okay, that's the protection policy. Now, once I have my snapshots and I have them setting on an hourly cadence or so I'm taking snapshots every hour, sending those snapshots over to Xi. Those snapshots land in Xi as immutable snapshots, right? Now I can recover those snapshots anytime I want. Now, that's a recovery plan. A recovery plan pretty much defines also 4 things. It defines, hey, are there any interdependencies or between these VMs when I recover them, right? And those dependencies can be either dependencies between VM 1, 2, and 3. So in the case where I have a 3-tier application and I want to recover my database tier before my app tier, before my web tier, I can define that in my recovery plan. Secondly, I can define any dependencies between groups of VMs. So for instance, if I had a group of VMs here that were my DMZ tier, and I needed to recover my DMZ tier before I recover the rest of my infrastructure, I can define that in my recovery plan as well. Secondly, I can run scripts. Sorry, here we go. I can run scripts in any one of these VMs when they're recovered in Xi. So I can run scripts for any purpose, whether I'm running a homegrown script, or I want to vet a service, or I want to ping an IP address, or I want to run some type of configuration management script like Ansible, Calm, Puppet, Chef. I can do all that when I recover these VMs. Thirdly, I can actually assign a public IP address to any VM when it recovered in Xi. I can assign that automatically in Xi Leap. We have a pool of IP addresses. You actually get 4 of those public IP addresses that come with the service. You can have more if you need more. But yes, so in the case, that scenario with the DMZ VMs, if I had these DMZ VMs that had public facing IP addresses, and when I fail them over to Xi, I need to assign them public IP addresses in Xi, I can do that automatically and net those public IP addresses to their private IP addresses. And now this VM will have access to the internet, or can have access to the internet if I so choose, as soon as it comes up in Xi, right? And last and most importantly is the network configuration when you fail over to Xi. So by default, right, when you have a network defined on-prem, let's say 1024.10.0, and you want to fail over that network over to Xi, you will define that in the protection policy. Xi Leap will automatically create that subnet, with the same network configuration that you defined from on-prem. So if it's 1024.10.0 on-prem, Xi Leap by default will choose 1024.10.0 in Xi. Subsequently, all your VMs will rehydrate with the same IP addresses and MAC addresses. So you don't have to re-IP anything, you don't have to change anything. This will all happen automatically. Lastly, or you have the option to change that network IP address configuration, that subnet configuration. And if you so choose to do so, if I change this to 192.168.10.0, subsequently all my VMs will re-IP themselves automatically 192.168.10.x, whatever the last octet is, okay? And that's really how protection policies work, how recovery plans work, right? Now, I have those policies defined. I'm sending, snapshots across to Xi. Those snapshots are sitting here. Again, immutable snapshots waiting to be recovered. I can now use those same snapshots. Remember, this is the same cluster, but two virtual clusters. I can use the same snapshots to now instantiate my test VPC, right? And again, this test VPC completely isolated sandbox. It does not route to the production VPC, and it does not route to on-prem. Remember, there's only this one connection back to on-prem. What does that mean? That means that because I'm using these same snapshots, I can instantiate this test VPC any time of the day I want for whatever purpose I want. If I just want to test, a patching, I'm doing some patching testing, or see how patching will work on a specific VM or application, or I want to just test a specific application in my test VPC, I can do that. Or if I want my developers to actually test a whole new application, I can actually give them access into this test VPC as well. The only access into this test VPC is either through the console, which then the Prism console in Xi, which gives you access to the VM console, or through the internet, right? Because as part of the Xi Leap service, we actually give you an internet gateway in each one of these VPCs, which gives you access into these VPCs independently, right? And as such, we actually have a virtual firewall in each one of these VPCs as well, so that you can control ingress, egress access into those VPCs. Again, all the requirements for instantiating your data center services are already set in Xi. Internet access through our internet gateway, right? And then again, creating all these VMs in their subnet and their network information automatically, right? So all that's there. Again, test VPC, completely isolated, live blast zone if you want. I can introduce malware in here. I can introduce viruses in here. I can introduce, ransomware in here if I wanted to, right? Completely isolated. It doesn't impact your capability to actually fail over in a real production scenario, or your day-to-day operations on-prem. So again, I can be working on-prem and test a new application in the test VPC anytime I want to. All right. That's pretty much Xi Leap. Any questions so far? Any questions on this architecture diagram?
There's a question that is going to be kind of common across most of the organizations that are perhaps considering some type of disaster recovery as a service solution. What about, you covered this, I think, through just kind of the architecture of what this looks like, but a big concern within the tribal space is data sovereignty. Making sure that data that is sitting in the cloud is not escaping, isn't, able to be seen by anybody but the people who essentially are owning that data. What assurances or, checks are in place, or encryption, or whatever it may be, essentially to kind of facilitate that. So, maybe to calm some of those fears about that move and shift to the cloud which would be the first for a lot of the organizations that would be even looking at this.
Absolutely. Great question. Again, couple of things we do relative to data sovereignty. Great question, Justin. So one, this data coming across this layer 3 connection, there we go, my little mouse there. This data coming across, again, this is an IPsec VPN tunnel, so this data is encrypted. That's first and foremost. Data at rest is encrypted, so all your snapshots are encrypted when they land in Xi. We only use encrypted data in Xi, so all of this are encrypted. Again, you're isolated to a single tenant, so you're not sharing infrastructure necessarily, right, with any other customers in Xi. Again, this is single tenancy. You have your own physical cluster, and that physical cluster is then broken into 2 virtual clusters with our SDN technology, right? So from that perspective, and then again, with all our ISO certs and attestations, right? And SOC 2 attestations as well, certifications, we can absolutely validate that there will be no data breach within the service in and of itself. And then again, security into these VPCs in a failover scenario is absolutely manageable by you through the internet gateway, because we have a firewall where you can absolutely set the policies for who and what enters into those VPCs from the internet, right? So not only do we have all the cloud-based security posture set up there, but also you have control with this internet, with this virtual firewall and our internet gateway to further control any ingress egress from there, from the internet. Sorry. Make sense?
So yeah, let you. I believe the next thing is the demo. Is that correct?
Yes.
Cool.
So the next thing is the demo. So let's walk through a quick demo. So understanding the construct of this, I'm sure you guys get the gist. And so what I'll do next is actually walk through a demo real quick. And I'm just going to end the show here. Let's do that. Okay. And I am going to walk through a failover scenario. Okay. So let me just log back in here to my Zyleap environment. So here, what you're seeing on the screen, can you guys still see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I'm logging into mynutanix.com, and I'm just going to log back in here just to give you guys full confidence here. So here we are. I logged into mynutanix.com. I am going to log in with my Zyleap credentials here that I have. So by the way, as a Nutanix customer, every Nutanix customer has a My Nutanix account. When you subscribe to Zyleap, we actually give you access to Zyleap based on your Nutanix account, right? So that subscription is paired to that account. And now that I have my Nutanix, my Zyleap subscription paired to my Nutanix account, I can now log in to Zyleap. So let me just get that Zyleap information. Sorry. Let's get this here going here. Okay, here we are, double long bottom. And then Nutanix. Excellent. It's going to ask me for two-factor authentication. Here we are. I'm just going to enter that real quick. 681-442. Of course, it changed right after I started. 547. So Zyleap, actually, all our X as a service products require multi-factor authentication now. So yes, as a Zyleap subscriber, you will now require multi-factor authentication. I think that's true for anything into mynutanix.com. So again, here we are. Because I'm a Zyleap subscriber and I see the Zyleap widget, and I can launch Zyleap, the Zyleap console from the mynutanix.com account. Again, anywhere in the world. So if I couldn't get to my on-prem data center, I just go to mynutanix.com to invoke a failover, right? A failover has to be manually invoked, right? So somebody has to press the panic button, right? We will never fail over to Zyleap automatically because any little blip in your environment could cause a failover, right? So we don't want to do that. So there's my Zyleap environment, and what you notice right here on the screen is my Zy console, the dashboard. And the first thing you'll notice if you're a current Zyleap, a Nutanix customer, it pretty much looks like your Prism Central, Prism Element dashboard. So if I go to my on-prem side, and this is my on-prem side, by the way, and I'm looking at my on-prem dashboard, you can see my on-prem dashboard looks pretty much the same as my Zyleap dashboard. The difference being that on-prem, I can manage physical cluster infrastructure. In Zyleap, there's no infrastructure to manage. It's as a service. So all you're managing in Zyleap is your capacity to actually invoke failovers, manage those policies that I talked about, protection policies and recovery plans, and then make those network connectivity that happens between Zyleap and on-prem. If I explore my Zyleap console, I can see that I actually did a previous failover before, and I have some VMs running in Zyleap. So you can see I have 4 VMs running here, and then I have a VM called BG Test VM. This VM I actually created in Zyleap. So again, if you recall in the diagram, I mentioned the fact that we can actually run live workloads in Zy, right? I actually ran a live workload in Zy. This one, BG Test VM. And if you notice, this VM is on a different network than these other VMs, right? A different subnet or VLAN. So yes, you can actually create live networks in Xi, and then again, route these networks back to on-prem, giving you that to data center manageability, connectivity, or the ability to actually run live workloads in both data centers. This is my Xi side. So again, the policy, if I go back to my on-prem side, you can see my on-prem side. I have a set of VMs running here. I have VMs 4 and 5 running here. Again, connectivity to Xi Leap is pretty straightforward. I won't go into all that, but what I'll show you real quickly is how we can fail over from Xi Leap back to on-prem. So in a previous exercise, I actually failed over VMs 1, 2, and 3 from on-prem to Xi Leap, and they're now running in Xi Leap. And what I want to show you is that I'm going to actually fail these VMs back over to on-prem, right? If you look at my recovery points, this actually speaks to which VMs I'm actually protecting from on-prem to Xi Leap. And when I actually delve deeper into the recovery points, you can see all the snapshots or all the retention policy that I have for these VMs, right? So I'm taking a snapshot pretty much every hour on the hour. And then I did some work here when I did a failover, and that's why you see these additional snapshots here. But let's just go ahead and do a failover from Xi Leap to on-prem to show you the failback capability of Xi Leap. So again, I failed over at some point. I'm running these VMs 1, 2, and 3 now from on-prem to in Xi Leap. They're running in Xi Leap. Again, created the network in Xi Leap, created the IP addresses. And by the way, if I come to the recovery plan real quickly, I just want to show you this. And I looked at the recovery plan logs. Here is the log when I did a failover earlier today at 2:02 p.m. 2:02 p.m., right? So I did a failover at 2:02 p.m. That failover log, it shows you everything that happened in that recovery plan, right? So the recovery plan said, hey, create this subnet 10.40.0.1, right? Migrate VMs 1, assign it a floating IP address, a public IP address, power on VM1, wait, power on VM, migrate VM2, et cetera, okay? So this is exactly what happened a little more than an hour ago, a little less than an hour ago, before I joined the call. All right, now that my VMs are running in Xi and I want to fail back over to on-prem, what I do for a failover is go to the site that I want to fail over to. Now, what you'll notice is that here I have the same policies at PRBG as I have in Xi at PRBG. Same protection policies, same recovery plans. At PRBG recovery plan in Xi, at PRBG recovery plan on-prem, right? So here it is, same recovery plans. Again, this is the consistency that we provide with Xi Leap, right? Same plan, same policies in both sites so that the same policy applies going back and forth. So I select the policy and I select a failover. And now that I can failover, by the way, sorry, let me go back one step before I do this. When I select the policy, I can select what I can do in that policy with that recovery plan. I can validate this recovery plan. I can do a failover into my test VPC, that isolated sandbox that I mentioned to you guys in the diagram. I can clean up that environment in one click. I can update this recovery plan. I can do a failover into that production VPC, the VPC that's actually connected back to on-prem, and I can do a delete. So let's do a failover and fail this over and see what happens. Oh, darn it, I missed it. This is now doing a validation, but I wanted to show you guys, and I'll go back and show you guys probably later if we have time, but there was an option to do either a planned failover or an unplanned failover, right? A planned failover is a pragmatic, proactive failover, meaning, hey, I have some data center management or some data center maintenance that I need to do this weekend. I'm gonna move my workloads to Xi to do that. Or I know a disaster is pending, is coming, so I'm gonna move my workloads over to Xi. Or I need to move my data center. I need to physically pick it up, all my infrastructure, and move it to another data center in another location. You can move all your workloads in Xi, run in Xi, while you physically then move your resources, your physical resources from one location to another. That's a planned failover. In a planned failover event, right? There is absolutely no data loss, because what we do in a planned failover event is we quiesce all IO, take a snapshot, shut down the VMs, and then move that snapshot over to Xi and recover from that snapshot. So there's no data loss in a planned failover event. And if I look at the log in this failover event, you can see this failover taking action now, right? If I include all tasks. So that's a planned failover event. No data loss, because we're actually taking a new snapshot from the on-prem infrastructure or from the primary location and then moving that snapshot over to Xi. So intact, right? In an unplanned failover event, that's where we assume that your data center is gone, or a catastrophic event happened to your data center and you cannot access your data center. So now you just have to do something unplanned and recover from either the last snapshot or one of the snapshots in your retention policy, right? So now that gives you the capacity to now select any one of the snapshots in your retention policy to recover from, and that's an unplanned failover. So again, this failover action is happening, and what you can see now, if I go back to my on-prem VM list, you can see that all my VMs now are either up and running in Xi, on-prem, recovered on-prem, and now running back on-prem, VMs 1, 2, and 3, right? Are now running on-prem. And when I go back to my Xi side, you can see that these VMs are now gone from the on the Xi side, right? Leaving my live VM that I'm running in Xi, my real live workload that I'm running in Xi. This is pretty much how Xi works. Again, failover from on-prem to Xi, exactly as I just showed you, failover or fail back from Xi to on-prem. This is Xi Leap. And this is how you can protect your infrastructure environment, have fully validated business continuity, disaster recovery, and have your business back up and running in an hour or less.
All right.
That's my presentation.
I appreciate it, Bert. Real quick, if you could just go back to your deck, I wanted to just have you go to the slide. I wanted to end on just a quick note from Tracy Kinney, who is with Tribal Hub, and have her just discuss some of the events that they have upcoming. And Tracy, I just moved you to the panelist, I thought. So you should be able to talk. All right. Yeah. So Tracy, if you want to go ahead and unmute and just give us a quick rundown of the upcoming Tribal Hub events, that'd be awesome.
Sure. Thanks. I know you guys are trying to wrap up, so I'll be brief. My name is Tracy. I'm from Tribal Hub. For those of you that aren't familiar with Tribal Hub, we exist as a platform to bring IT decision makers together from tribes across the country, along with business executives. For some reason, I just there. Okay. So our goal is always to bring peer-to-peer conversations available for people from one tribe to another to learn from each other, and also to partner with solution providers such as Nutanix. So we've been in business about 20 years. For some of you, you might have been familiar with our annual TribalNet conference that happens every November. This year, we hope to be face-to-face in Dallas, Texas, November 8th to the 11th. But I wanted to tell you real fast about some regional events we're doing virtually in the next couple of months as well. As you can see from the slide here, we have our first one for the California region happening next week, Tuesday and Wednesday. There is still spots available, so if you are interested in attending from California area, just email me. I will have Justin maybe drop my email in the chat for you. But then we've got other events happening throughout the rest of the spring and summer. So if you are from a tribe or a tribal enterprise or tribal health center in the central region, Southwest, and then we have Northwest and Midwest happening in May, and then we hope to do Alaska in the summer. So all of those are open and available. We would love to hear from you and get you connected. The registration is free for anyone who's working at a tribe, like I said, a tribal organization, and we're able to bring that to you with partnerships like Nutanix. So thanks so much for having me on for just a quick minute. Hope you guys had a great session, and I'd love to hear from any of you.
Thanks, Tracy. I appreciate it. Yeah, if you're a tribe who's not, dialed in with Tribal Hub or been to TribalNet, I highly recommend it. It's a great place to just talk with your peers in different tribes and technology, and then, vendors like Nutanix. So I really appreciate everybody taking the time today to join us for this presentation on Leap and disaster recovery as a service solutions. Again, if you have any questions and you want to reach out to us, it's tribes@nutanix.com. So I hope everyone has a great day. I apologize for going a couple minutes over here, but with all the technical difficulties and everything, I think we kept it pretty much on time. So thanks again, and hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you, guys. Much obliged. Appreciate the audience as well. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Bert.